Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about the old versus the new. I want to talk about the brand new Synology 1520 Plus, the new 5-bay expansion that they've released in summer 2020. I want to compare it against what I think is its predecessor, the Synology DS1019 Plus, released a little over a year ago. These two 5-bay devices, although very similar, and both serving as a kind of natural progression on the 4 bays of their respective families of the 920 and the 918 respectively. These two 5-bay devices are very good middle ground series devices in Synology's flagship of kind of the Plus series and ultimately the middle of their portfolio. They've got the budget area at one end with the J's and the low end stuff and like the standard series editions, and at the other end you've got a bunch of XS and Flash Station and some crazy town stuff. But in the middle you've got the Plus series that generally is there to is designed to give you a very good experience of all of the DSM packages for virtual machine surveillance, collaboration, suite photos, video, music, Plex Media Server, 4K, you name it, it's all in there, as well as simple backups. But these two 5-bays are two of the closest release NASs I've seen for quite a long time within the series of Synology products. Generally, most solutions from Synology on release are around about 18 months to 3 years in release difference, depending on the ranges. Now, some of them take even longer than that, but as an average, you generally find a lot of these series, a natural predecessor comes out around about 1.5 to 3 years later. But the case of the 1019 was revealed quite a long time before it eventually was released. And in fact, when you look at the release dates between these two NASs, you see that the release difference is just over a year, give or take, which isn't a huge amount of time. And on top of that, Synology, up until that point when the 1019 arrived, had several generations of 5-bays. That 5-bay series was predominantly known for being like 4 LAN, it had a PCIe upgrade slot to the later editions. It always had a Celeron Atom, and not a Celeron Atom, an Intel Atom and Devaton sometimes. And it was always kind of a very business-led solution. A lot of you used to really get, quite annoyed that it didn't have a graphically enabled chiplet or something like a Celeron or maybe even a Pentium. And now, last year, when that Celeron-powered 5-bay came about, a number of you were kind of like, cool, we've got the kind of architecture we want, like in the 918, but you've got rid of a few of the things. You've got rid of the LANs, you've got rid of the 15 maximum drive, you've got rid of a bunch of stuff. And clearly, Synology did listen with this brand new 1520 Plus. The 1520 Plus has a bunch of stuff from the older gen 5-bay series and the newer gen 5-bay DS1019, and today I want to talk about how the new 1520 compares against the older 1019. Whether you are an old buyer who's already purchased the 1019 and is thinking, what, do I upgrade now? Do I stick with this? Have I been shortchanged? Or are you the second group who are on the fence about to buy and have seen the 1520, looked at the 1019, which may be available on some decent little prices on some websites floating around now, and thinking, do I need all of that new stuff when the old stuff does such a damn fine job? So, we want to compare these NASs. Real brief disclaimer though, this is the 1019. Right now, my 1520 Plus is in testing for the software review. I've already filmed the hardware review. So again, I apologise that unit isn't here right now. I couldn't disconnect it right now during the building of an SHR. So for now, I'm going to keep this on the table, but this represents both of them. And I will talk about a lot of their hardware, software features and talk about whether you should go for one or the other throughout. But I will say straight off the bat that in practically every way, the Synology 1520 is the better NAS if you can afford it. If you can see the 1520, you've already committed to spend that kind of money, the 1520 is the better NAS of the two. In today's video, I'm going to explain why. I've already used 4 minutes of your time, so let's crack on. First and foremost, let's talk about the difference between price and value, because these two devices actually arrive at really similar price points. There's not a huge amount of difference between them. There's, arguably the 1520 is a larger price tag, so sheer numeracy lends to the idea that the 1019 Plus is the better price between the two of them, but price and value do not always come hand in hand. A lot of the time you spend a bit extra because you're getting more for your money, and the 1520 is a very, very good example of that. Case in point, they've both got Celeron-based CPUs, quad-core. They've both got 8 gig of memory. They've both got NVMe SSD cache. They both run DSM6.2 currently, with 7 at the end of the year, shaping up to be very, very good. They've both got 1 GBE as standard. They've both got USB 3, and they're both expandable with the DX517. So on the face of it, incredibly similar. But the money that you pay for, the little bit extra for the 1520, you pay for two things: longevity and future-proofing. Because with that 1520, you get the same CPU, sure, and you get the same 8 gig of max memory, but you get DDR4 memory on the 1520, and you get DDR3L on the 1019. And in terms of that 1 GBE that I mentioned there, the 1 GBE, you get 4 of them, 4 LAN ports on the 1520 and 2 on the 1019. In terms of expandability, you have the ability to add 5 drives to the 1019, but you can add 10 drives to that of the 1520. It's about expandability and the ability to add more later. You're spending more now, so you can recoup that money later on down the line. That's what I mean about value. Now, if you don't think you're going to use all those features, who cares? Screw it. You don't need to buy it. But there's still no avoiding that the price tag that's increased on the 1520 is moderately justifiable given the increased hardware inside. So again, if you are struggling for the financial sales point, you are almost certainly going to pick up a 1019 at a very, very good price. And if you get hold of one, it is a very, very good NAS. I said it last year and I stand by that now. But if you can budget, if you can stretch towards it in terms of value, go for that 1520, because you will not regret it both on day 1 and day 100. So moving forward from that, let's talk about internal performance. Internal and external performance have to be gauged differently on any NAS, because not only you, the end user, may have a different priority to what you want the NAS to do, and therefore you have to scale your budget accordingly to the hardware, but on top of that, the internal performance of a NAS does not always necessarily mean external speeds match that. In many NAS cases, we have seen some NASs like the old 5-bay, the 1517 and the 1817, both of which were large NASs, particularly the 1817 Non-Plus, which featured 10 GBE on board, which is great. It did not have good enough hardware inside to give you top-end 10 GBE performance, particularly in a multi-user environment. And that was an example of internal and then external performance not agreeing. Now, in the case of the 1019 and the 1520, in terms of internal performance, it should be stated that on day 1, with the same number of hard drives inside, if they've both got the same 5 SATA hard drives inside, they both support 16 TB, so you're up to 18 TBs raw if you want to go max on day 1. They're going to give you the same performance on day 1, typically. They've both got 8 gig of memory, they've both got a quad-core Celeron, in the case of the J3455 on the older generation device, and then J4125, so another generation higher of Celeron, with a higher frequency as well, both base and bursted on the newer generation device. But on day 1, you're going to get the same performance between them. Even RAID and any of that stuff, or SSD caching that you factor inside, it's going to be the same performance on both devices at the beginning. The difference is going to be the extent of that performance. Because both devices, even when they're doing exactly the same task, you will find that the 1520 is going to use less power and less memory to do those tasks. The average task is going to use slightly less hardware in terms of the internal hardware available on that 1520. Now on day 1, as I say, because you're not maxing it out, you're never going to know. Unless you're closely monitoring the task manager, you're not going to know how much the system's going to be using. But once you start doing 2 or 3 processes at once, when you've got 2 to 3 people watching media at once, when you're running 1, maybe 2 small VMs, when you're running more and more cameras, the more things you do, then you will start to see the difference. Because if the 1520 can do the same things but use slightly less each time, the more things you do, the more likely it is that the 1019 will run out of resources first. Even with intelligent caching that's built into DSM, and a lot of the improvements coming in DSM7 with background caching and smart utilization to have that smarter, more slicker user interface, there's no avoiding that the 1520 in that it's got the horsepower inside to go longer. So internal performance, you've got to give it to the 1520, because the 1520 it's just got more to work with. Now, in terms of external performance, it comes as absolutely no surprise that the 1520 is going to win that one again. And as I say, it's going to win pretty much everything, because external performance comes down to those 4 LAN ports. Now, the external performance will of course be dictated by that internal CPU memory and if you use caching, but it's not as impactful as the multiple LAN ports. The 1019, because it's got 2 1GBE ports, each of which are RJ45 that can be link aggregated, it means you can get anywhere from around about 100 to 110 megs all the way up to about 210, 220 megabytes per second upload and download from the device. But in the case of the 1520, because it's got 4 LAN ports, with link aggregation, you're looking at up to 440 megabytes per second upload download. Obviously not simultaneously, it has to share that bandwidth with the network, but that is still a very, very impressive jump and twice the external performance. And once again, the CPU and the memory inside being more efficient will mean it will do a much better job of achieving those higher speeds than that of the 1019. So you are getting better hardware inside to support the external transmission. Of course, regardless of which device you use, you're going to need link aggregation supported on a local switch, a managed switch, and for one user to get that 200 or 400 meg speed, they're also going to either have to have link aggregation supported, or it's a tiered switch where one main user is connected to the switch via 10 GBE and the NAS is connected via 2 or 4 1 GBE LAN ports. But nevertheless, the 1520 is winning hands down in terms of external performance, which brings us to the last area, storage. A NAS is going to be with you and on 24/7. You're going to need to make sure that you've got enough space for now and the future, but later down the line, those drives can fill up. There's going to be compression techniques you can employ. You can use a lot of deduplication by a lot of client apps, although Synology's compression and some of that deduplication stuff is more refined in that of DSM7, which allows you yet to arrive for the time of this video. But in terms of raw storage, although both of them have got 5 SATA bays, which as mentioned, allow you to get currently up to 80 TB, the 1019 only allows you to add 1 expansion chassis, the 517, allowing you to turn your 5 bays into 10 bays. But the 1520 allows you to add 2 of those expansions, allowing you to get up to a maximum 15 drives. So that means 160 terabytes maximum versus 240 terabytes maximum. Of course, volumes can sometimes hit that limit, but in terms of raw storage pools and expanding your storage, it's very hard to argue with that expandability on the 1520. Now, why do you use an expansion? Well, because as the data fills up on your NAS and you start running out of storage, what are your options? One, you can start swapping out drives if you want and replace them in the RAID. It's a very tricky procedure and it just kind of kicks things down the line. And generally, the increases you, unless you buy very small drives on day one, are very, very small. Number 2, you can buy a new NAS with a lot more bays and move over to it, but then you will have to replace and change all of your shares. You'll have to change all your targets, your iSCSIs, your cameras. Basically, every single link, map drive, whatever, to the NAS will have to be moved over. You can't just connect to new NAS. A lot of the time, the passover is by no means straightforward. And that's why a lot of people go for the expansion option, because it's the least stressful and the easiest, where all you do is you go on the rear of the NAS, connect via eSATA, the expansion chassis. It has its own power and its JBOD, but the NAS will then see the added drives that you've made available and then include them in the storage at your behest. You can expand your RAID or your SHR to add 5 more bays, effectively doubling your available storage capacity or more, depending on the drive you put in that expansion. So in terms of expandability, they've both got the feature, but the 1520 is just doing it more and bigger. And again, because it's got that improved CPU and memory inside, which are marginal improvements, it has to be said, it's still enough horsepower inside to support those larger degree of expansions to become available. And ultimately, that's why, comparing these two devices, the 1520 is always going to be the better NAS choice between them, both in terms of value, internal, external performance, and storage. It's just a better and more evolved solution moving forward. They're incredibly similar, and if you already own the 1019, unless that storage thing is a bit of a bother, I wouldn't worry. I'd stick with what you've got, because the difference between them isn't vast. Definitely not enough to justify a wholesale upgrade unless you only bought it like 30 days ago. But there's still no avoiding that the 1520 is just a more mature solution overall. And it's another great example of how brands evolve year on year. It's easy for us that have got an older device to go, well, it's not fair, I want all that stuff. But that's just the way technology moves forward. You invest when you invest, and a lot of you that will buy the 1019 might be looking jealously at that 1520 and some of that hardware and saying, why not me? I wouldn't worry, the 1019 is great. But this has been comparing the 1019 versus the 1520. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, visit the written breakdown comparison with a lot more specs in it below at NAS Compares. And of course, if you're buying a NAS for the first time, I recommend you go to the guys at span.com, the NAS experts. They will help you out every step of the way with free pre and post sales tech support. 25 years in the biz, they know what they're doing. And otherwise, click like if you've enjoyed the video, click subscribe to learn more, and I will see you next time.